I think like most junior high-aged teenagers, your parents begin to push you towards something, and mine always pushed me towards music, and I began playing, in the band at junior high, clarinet, and so when you went into high school, it really began to separate. The band got serious, and you either were a good band member or you weren't, and you weren't going to survive if you weren't. And so singing became much more natural, and so high school choir was the natural extension of that. And I'm not sure that I ever have had a great voice, adequate perhaps. I was always able to sing good harmonies, and I think that was the natural growth of, what happened with the Turtles, was that Howard was really good at, singing the melody and had a really distinctive voice, and we sort of all fit around that. And the other members of the Turtles were in the choir as well, and so that's sort of how it progressed.
So have you had any actual voice training?
Well, only at the university level, but nothing really professionally. I did study with a lady who taught at the university, but not to sing, more to learn how to save my voice.
Uh-huh.
And how to use it so that I wouldn't, lose it. And that's a hard thing. I mean, we sing 60 shows perhaps a year, and with our touring, it pretty beats you up pretty good, the travel. And then I also, during the spring and the fall, I am a university lecturer, teacher at 2 universities, so I do 12 hours of lecturing per week, so I'm constantly using my voice, and I wish I had had a little bit more training to preserve it, but it's still holding up.
What do you lecture on? What are the subjects of your lectures?
I teach in the music and film and television schools at 2 universities. I teach music history, and I also teach music business courses in the film and television school.
In 1963, Howard Kalin had a band already called the Night Riders, a surfing combo, I read here, and they changed their name to Crossfires, and you kind of worked your way in initially as their roadie, and then what happened?
Well, as the roadie, I really carried the equipment, and slowly but surely I began, kind of forcing the issue a little bit and began singing with Howard on a couple of the songs in the show. I always had a really good spirit when it came to the live performance, and I think that I sort of drove the energy of the band, to perhaps another level, and everybody really liked what I did when I joined in with Howard. So we began to add the 2-voice combination on the songs that the band was doing, and then slowly but surely, as the British invasion became in 1964 more of the musical trend, we were able to accomplish that as a reproduction because of our capabilities of singing in harmony coming out of the high school choir. So it was really the building process of me joining the group was, from roadie to playing some tambourine and singing along with Howard to the band having me join the group as a full-time member.
All right, let's back up just a little bit now. When you were with the Crossfires, and that was about 1961, something of that era, and there.
No, Crossfires was about 1962, 63, up to About 1964, actually.
So-
We didn't really change our name until the early part of 1965 to the Turtles.
Okay. Now I see reading here that you were at the was it the house band, if I understand it right, at the Ronaldo Beach, Manhattan area,
Yeah.
for the Reb Foster's Revelaire Club.
Reb Foster was a disc jockey in Los Angeles on KRLA. KRLA was the station that brought the Beatles to the Hollywood Bowl. That's where Bob Eubanks was a disc jockey. And Reb was afternoon drive time. His brother-in-law ran the nightclub in Redondo Beach under Reb's name, because being a disc jockey, it would be a almost natural extension of the show getting press and the club building a following. And so Reb Foster had this night spot, and as a band, we actually lived north of Redondo Beach in a little town called Westchester, and we won a Battle of the Bands on a Sunday afternoon. The Battle of the Bands at that time was really just a promotion so that the nightclub would do these afternoon events, and they would pretty much make it free for kids to come in, and the only thing you'd have to pay for were food and drinks. And so we won a Sunday Battle of the Bands, which elevated us to a Friday evening Battle of the Bands, and then it cost money for the kids to come. And so every group that got to that Battle of the Band on Friday night really had we had a very strong high school fan base of about, 600 fans that would pretty much follow us around the South Bay. And so we won the Battle of the Bands on a Friday night, and then we were invited to play at the club every Friday night, and that became our Hamburg,
There you go. All right, so you were the house band there for what? Did you open up for any big acts at that time?
Well, what would happen is that Reb Foster basically ran two nightclubs, one in Redondo Beach, the Revelaire Club, and one in Orange County, which was called the Retail Clerks Union Hall. And what the major acts would do, because KRLA was probably the number 2 pop station in Los Angeles behind KHJ's Boss Jocks, the big acts would come into town, and then Friday evening they would do a show at the Retail Clerks early, and then drive up to Redondo Beach and play at the Revelaire. And we had to learn their show because they traveled without a band. And so we would back up acts like the Righteous Brothers and the Drifters and the Coasters and Sonny and Cher and whoever was out on the touring marketplace at the time. And so it wasn't so much we opened for them. We basically played our show. Our show ran from like 8 to midnight. And then in somewhere within the evening, whenever the star act got there, we would just back them up. And so that was pretty much the way it worked. It wasn't like opening act and they played and then the show's over.
Okay, so you got to actually perform with some pretty big stars at a young age then.
Yeah, I remember some really exceptional evenings working with a lot of these artists who had already had careers, and Dale and Grace and Paul and Paula and Dick and Dee Dee and all of those kind of late 50s into early 60s groups that were having hit records, but rock and roll was such an early age at that time. I mean, before the British invasion, there wasn't a rock and roll business that was, it wasn't as refined. It wasn't as meticulously looked after as commerce. Artists didn't have a plan. The touring business wasn't what it was. It was fairly sporadic. I mean, an artist would just come in and play, and it wasn't like you were on a 15 or 18-day tour.
Okay, now you've made reference a couple of times here to the Beatle invasion and all of this. At that time, when about 1964, when the Beatles did hit America, they made a pretty big impression on you guys, didn't they?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, everyone. I mean, we were playing musically the same material the Beatles sort of reintroduced to the American public. I mean, we were doing the same cover songs that they were bringing back via their first couple of albums, which, Kansas City and Matchbox and early Carl Perkins and Chuck Berry and those early masters of rock and roll, and Buddy Holly, and I mean, those were all foundations for groups who played in the nightclubs here. And it wasn't because of the Beatles. That was just the sign of the times. And when the Beatles came along, it sort of reinforced what we were already doing, but it also gave us a new vitality in terms of the material that they brought with it in their musical history. And so, yes, it certainly opened up the door for us to begin thinking of ourselves in terms as songwriters and song creators. And up till then, we were pretty much the standard fare, just playing oldies of the time. And I think the Beatles opened the door for a lot of artists to begin thinking of the reality being that you could write music and do something original.
Now, these revelations you had during this time kind of led to a bit of frustration to the fact that you decided to leave the Rebel Air Club, right?
Well, we had a really long run there. I mean, we had played there about a year as a house band. It was kind of a mutual thing. We were going to... The band was literally breaking up. I mean, we had two members of our group that were a little bit older than the core of the band. The core of the Turtles came out of Westchester High School. That was Howard and I and the other two original members of the Turtles, Chuck and Al. And that was a little bit younger core. The other members of the group were about a year older than us. And so in 1964, we had 3 members of the group, 4 members of the group graduate high school. And by 1965, the reality of the situation was that members of the group, a couple of them have gotten married. One had a child. College was in the life of 2 of the members, 3 of the members. So, I mean, things were changing. I was the youngest in terms of coming out of high school. I was the last to make the break out of high school. And by the time I made the break, the group was pretty much considering that we were done. We had guys who needed to really concentrate on making more money than the money we were making on a weekend-to-weekend basis. So,
now, you're still talking about the Crossfires at this point, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
But right around this time that you're speaking of, the Turtles evolved, right?
Well, yeah, Bill Utley, Reb Foster's cousin, who owns the Rebel Air Club, brings 2 fellas down to see our show on one of our Friday nights, which happens to be a Friday night we're actually going to break up. We're actually going to hand in our resignation and pretty much move on with our lives. And these 2 fellas are ex-A&R men from 2 companies, Imperial Records, I think, or Liberty Records and Columbia, and they're starting a brand new independent record label. And they like our sound and offer us a chance to record 3 songs with the intention of seeing if they're radio friendly or radio worthy. And they like particularly the way that we're doing some of the music of the Byrds that had already released Mr. Tambourine Man. They were doing, we were singing the Bells of Rimney in our show. and a few other kind of folk rock staples. And so they advised us to perhaps pick out a Bob Dylan piece of music and then maybe come up with a couple of original songs. And it was during that next 10 days, 2 weeks that we put together this little demo, basically to go up into Hollywood to make a record, these 3 songs. And it was during these recordings that It Ain't Me, Babe would be the song that we chose to do as the Bob Dylan cover. And it ended up within about, 2 weeks, the record debuted in the charts in Los Angeles in the top 10. And so everything changed really quickly.
So you're right out of high school and you've already got a Bob Dylan cover hit on the top charts. That's got to be pretty overwhelming for a kid just right out of high school.
Yeah, you have to realize that we had nobody to compare it to. Today it's easy to when a band makes a record, you can there is a process, when an artist makes a record today, that process goes into action, and it becomes the fusion of art and commerce know how to function together, succinctly. You need the art, the music, and then you need the commerce, the marketing, and the manufacturing, and the publicity, and the promotion, and it all takes so much, but it's pretty much guidelined now. People know when you make a record, you need all of these elements in order to make a hit record. When we made our records, there weren't guidelines, and if there were, we were unaware of them totally. We were still this high school innocent, kids without really much perspective on the idea of it being music business. And so when we made It Ain't Me, Babe, it was really, it wasn't something that really caused a big reaction because we didn't really have anything to compare it to, we just were excited about being able to, meet girls and do what we had kind of been doing, which was playing music. And so when It Ain't Me, Babe became a hit record, and it kind of twisted our lives into, we got a tour coming up this summer we're going to do. The record came out in April, I believe, and by, within about 8 weeks, the record was now in the national charts, and Bill Utley was able to have gotten an agency to get us on a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars. So by May and June of that year, within about an 8-week process, we were immediately slung out on a bus with the likes of, Tom Jones and Peter and Gordon and the Shirelles and Ronnie Dove and Brian Hyland and all of these great historical figures in music history to us. 8 weeks ago, we were listening to their records,
You actually ran into Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan came to see us in about 1966. We went to play the Phone Booth in New York City, which was an uptown, nightclub. I want to say in the 40s, perhaps in the 50s, in Midtown Manhattan. And as the history knows, Bob Dylan had pretty much made his transition from Minnesota into New York, had fallen in the lower living areas of New York, mainly Greenwich Village, living with Ramblin' Jack Elliott at the Earl Hotel, which was where pretty much most all the folkies sort of fell in when you came into New York to try to make a living. I think Bob Dylan probably had a friend who might have mentioned that a band who had a hit song with one of his songs was playing in town, and he made the sojourn up to the bottom, to the nightclub we played, which was, I think, really out of character probably for him, because when he came up to see our show, he was fairly sedated, and he pretty much just sort of brushed us off. You know, I mean, he kind of shook our hands when he met us and sort of nodded his head and got on with his evening. So, I mean, our meeting Bob Dylan really wasn't what I would say was a meeting of the minds at all. It was sort of somebody's idea of a press thing, and it didn't really mean anything. Unfortunately, he was having some serious success at this time. You know, the Byrds had some significant hits with his records, so had Sonny and Cher and a few other artists. So I think here's just another group from California recording his records. Perhaps it wasn't the meaning that it could have been.
Well, do you have any association, or have you ever seen him since? I mean,
no.
Nope, he's just out there somewhere. All right, well, I bet he's got your record. Okay, I'm going to move along here. You got to touch on this one with me. The Grim Reaper of Love. Tell me about that, please.
Well, the Turtles were a very pliable group. We were very, we had really great capabilities, probably because of our history in the nightclubs of backing up all of those early artists that we backed up, and probably because we were a really excellent cover band. I think we were very pliable, and that just, in my mind, meant that we were able to kind of see the movement of the music business and sort of find a way to change our sound and finagle our way in. If you look at the music that led up to Grim Reaper of Love, our first two records were really cut out of the same die mold. It Ain't Me, Babe, Let Me Be. The jingle jangly guitars, the real kind of folk rock, the protest of Let Me Be, the animosity towards parental units trying to run the lives of teenagers. And it was a song of rebellion, not against society, but against parents, to let us grow up the way that we want to. And this song, Let Me Be, was really a fall away from the fact that we had turned down Eva Destruction because we really didn't understand the nature of the song, and we did understand Let Me Be because we were having tremendous problems with our own parents who wanted us to stop the music and to go into college and to be serious about our lives. And so Let Me Be really was our way of letting our parents kind of know that we're serious. Our next record, You Baby, was a really big change for us. It was a real straightforward pop song that came hot on the heels of our fan. We had become big fans of the New York band The Lovin' Spoonful, and we really liked the jug band style of music that John was writing and that they were playing. And You Baby really became kind of a salute musically to that style, and it also showcased that the Turtles were capable of doing something other than folk rock. At that point, we had actually been a band now from 1962 to 66. We had been together about 4 years. We were running into some issues within the band that were going to cause some strained relationships, and at this point in time, we did a record called Outside Chance. Well, actually, the first one was Grim Reaper of Love, and Grim Reaper of Love really was a record that showcased where we were kind of mentally. Psychedelic music had become really a very big part of the music scene. Records like 8 Mile High, on an album called 5D, which really showcased the really psychedelic music that was happening. And here we were again, the Turtles, with our pop sound, trying desperately to connect with the new psychedelic teens, that drug scene, the kind of intellectuality of the drug scene was changing music, and I think Grim Reaper of Love was our way of trying to find a base for ourselves. And at that point, when that record really was not much of a success in the way that It Ain't Me, Babe, Let Me Be, and You, Baby had been a success, with that happening, that personality problems, the touring problems, and everything else really erupted. And that's where the first big change took place. We lost our drummer and we lost our bass player. So the personnel changes would now change the movement of the band. And after Grim Reaper of Love, we had the record Outside Chance, which was a Warren Zevon song. Warren was writing for our record company. And then that didn't become a solid hit record for us. And then we did another record called Can I Get to Know You Better, which did better. It was kind of a revamped You Baby, kind of trying to go back. And at that point in time, with our new drummer in place, our new bass player, the band was really at a crossroads. And that's really, I think at that point, we had tried very hard to be successful by shaping our sound into what we thought radio was all about and what people expected. And I think that probably played into the fact that it was now time, if we were going to survive, we needed to find our own sound and our own musical history, so to speak. And so would, come a very big crossroads, because at this point it could have very well have been the end of the band. But instead, in a pile of demos, we discovered a song that really would change our lives, and that was the song Happy Together.